early detection and diagnosis of cancer is clearly a vital matter for us, particularly as we try to recover from the pandemic. So where are we? What is the problem that we face? Well, before the pandemic, we were very honest about our cancer outcomes as compared with other countries across the world. This was an issue for the UK, but Wales in particular. But we were making some improvements, and indeed the 1 year and 5 year cancer survival figures published today show there was continuing improvement. But still, a lot of our diagnostic pathways were hopelessly inefficient. For 100,000 GP referrals a year with a 7% conversion rate, we were still diagnosing only less than half, or just less than half, of all the cancers that occurred in a year, despite huge volumes of diagnostic capacity required to deliver that result. So really, we recognised even before the pandemic that we needed to do better with our risk assessment. Now, the pandemic obviously has been a massively disruptive event on all fronts, and clearly cancer outcomes are going to be impacted by it. We've got a number of cancers out there in Wales that we know are there still to be diagnosed, that would have been diagnosed under normal conditions but haven't been. And we know we've got a huge backlog of referrals in the system as the system sort of catches up with unmet need. So we do now need, and we also know that we've got less capacity available to deliver what people need to meet the demand. So we've got to make the best use of the capacity that we've got. So now is the time par excellence where we do need to innovate and to implement new clinical pathways, new diagnostic technologies. It's not a time for caution, and we can't seek perfection. I think we may have to recognise where an evidence base is incomplete, but actually be prepared to pilot and be early adopters and learn from the experience. We have to do this, otherwise we will never provide any care to a number of people waiting on our lists at present. So we know we're going to see the impact of the pandemic and cancer outcomes in the future, but we are absolutely committed to trying to minimise that impact. And early detection and diagnosis has to be right at the heart of that. So I understand there are delegates at this meeting from industry, from third sector, from academia, from NHS, and indeed from Welsh Government. This is a great opportunity to get together to consider one of the most pressing issues of our time, which is how we rapidly innovate in Wales to early diagnose cancer and try to minimise the impact of the pandemic on cancer outcomes.
So again, I'm just going to give a little bit of background, just touching on the case for change, really, that Chris has outlined in his talk, that we need to sort of see in cancer. Sam Harrison from Cancer Research UK is going to follow me, and we'll talk a little bit about the background and the evidence for earlier diagnosis, etc. Thank you. Next slide. So we know that we know the sort of scale of the challenge. We know that the burden of cancer in this left side is very significant. More than respiratory, cardiovascular, and liver disease put together, and causes of premature mortality. In terms of outcomes, in fact, patient experience is very good. Due to the hard work of our workforce that we rely on so heavily, most patients have a very good experience of cancer care in Wales, and just topically, we're just in the middle of redoing this national patient experience survey that we'll learn so much from. But we know that the outcomes in Wales, other outcomes, particularly related to survival, are not so good, and we tend to language behind other similarly developed sort of countries and jurisdictions, and Sam may touch on this a little bit longer, but although we're improving and we've seen those results today being launched, and I recommend that everybody follows those results about incidence and the survival of cancer, although things are improving, are we really closing the gap that we need to do? So next slide. And people will have seen this sort of shape curve for the, reflecting what's happened during the pandemic, the fall in referrals and diagnoses and treatments of cancer, and now the patients coming back into the system. So this is a measure of volume in open pathways in Wales that really describes why the sort of system is struggling so much, not just because of the increased demand, but as Chris sort of said, the capacity in the system is not where we want to be because of the pandemic. Next slide. And really, in the last few months, this has been sort of more worrying as the demand on the system accelerates, and we know that the performance of the cancer treatment system, as measured by waiting time, is not what we want it to be. Next slide. So one of the positives that's come out of the pandemic is that we've worked together as a system to understand the data a little bit better. And we now have, thanks to all the health boards and organisations in Wales that are contributing to this data, we've really got an idea of where patients are on their cancer pathway and where their pressure points are. So if you just go to the next slide, but the point I just really wanted to make is this actually goes back a few years, and although we have seen a dip in the pandemic in terms of referrals coming through, we have seen consistent demand over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And so I think even without the pandemic, I think we would be struggling to meet this demand as referrals from primary care for endoscopy, for imaging, have been going up by 10% a year relentlessly, and it was only a matter of time before we wouldn't be able to cope with that demand. So we need to think of doing of ways of doing things differently, and that's what today is really about. So next slide. So you know that very keen on cancer pathways, and the single cancer pathways are a really important part of trying to describe how we need to get the system working better, how we need to get the workforce, the facilities and the equipment to timely diagnose and treat our patients. But we know that even more importantly, that we know we're really only going to improve outcomes if we improve to the left of this slide, so that we make better lifestyle choices, we have better education for our patients in terms of coming forward, the uptake of screening is better, we have education and better access for diagnostics from primary care, so that we work together as a whole sort of system approach, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. So next slide. So I'm going to hand over now to Sam, and we've worked really closely with Cancer Research UK. I think I'm about 30 seconds behind now, so sorry, Sam, about that. But Sam is a research lead and a strategic evidence officer as part of the International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership. So thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you, Tom. Is there an echo? I don't know if I can hear myself back. No, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and I will try to keep to time, Tom. I think much of what you have covered and Chris has covered has already seen quite well from my slide. So next slide, please. So I don't really need to, I suppose, reiterate this point, but why do we want to improve cancer diagnosis? I think this slide very nicely kind of summarizes that. So if I draw your attention to the left-hand side for bowel cancer, you can see how much survival for 1 year and 5-year survival really does dip when diagnosed at the very latest stage. So stage distribution is 1, 2, 3, 4 at the bottom, and you can see it really take a real nosedive when you hit stage 4, whereas survival obviously is very high for stage 1 bowel cancers. So really trying to reiterate the point that we really want to see this shift because it has huge impact on people's chances of survival. Next slide, please. One of the things that we take account of when thinking about, I suppose, areas of need and areas of prioritization is thinking about the wide range of data we have access to within the cancer community. And this data on stage of diagnosis for Wales in 2018 very nicely shows that there are differences in terms of need by cancer site. For some cancers, we've got a significant problem with late stage disease, for example, pancreatic, on the right-hand side of this graphic, compared to other cancers that are not doing too badly when it comes to that stage distribution. So something to keep in mind when thinking about priorities for innovation and optimization. Next slide, please. So what do we need to do to reduce late stage diagnosis, and what factors should we consider? I could probably do an entire day session on the evidence that we've generated over the last decade and 15 years, but just to briefly touch on a few of the frameworks, I suppose, that we use to really try and unpick what drivers are contributing to late stage diagnosis and then what we can do about it. So the NADI hypothesis, many of you will know on the left hand side, really articulates the factors which contribute to that late stage of disease and is a useful framing for how we think about where we need to act. And then when flipping it on its head in the right side graphic, you can see really what we're trying to move on is in the purple. So we need more screening diagnosis, obviously with more informed choice there. Earlier help seeking for system, earlier referral for tests, and so on. So really these frameworks help hopefully with some of that strategic thinking there. Next slide, please. This graphic is very busy, but it is a popular one that we've produced a couple years ago. It's called the Early Diagnosis Waterfall. And really what it tries to show is that no one thing will help us address late stage cancer, and action is needed across all fronts. I suppose the thing to really highlight here in the dark purple is that really particularly research and innovation is needed to really shift the dial on late stage disease and really upping that early stage diagnosis. So for those that want more information on that, I'm happy to pick that up offline, but just conscious of time. So next slide, please. So Tom and indeed Chris have touched on this. I am part of the International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership. The partnership has really done a great job in highlighting that there are differences exist internationally between comparable countries. And as they say, Wales is doing a good job in terms of moving in the right direction, but we still have a lot to do in terms of catch up. And really what the partnership tries to do is identify the countries that we can learn from, try and articulate what they're doing better, and what we can learn from them is really a vital piece of the partnership. Next slide, please. One of the key data we collect is stage data, and really this helps us unpick some of the drivers, whether it's early diagnosis and its stage distribution where we're seeing the real specific differences, or whether it's stage specific survival. This is for lung cancer, and if I just point you to the box for Wales, on the right hand side you can see 15% of non-small lung cancers are diagnosed at stage 1 or localized stage in Wales, compared to 24% in Ireland and Norway. So what could we be learning from these other countries to really try and understand, and adapt what they've done to the context here? Next slide, please. So that really was a snapshot. As I say, I could have talked for a long time, and we do have a number of publications and other infographics and data that we can share with you if of interest. But just to say, really, I suppose to hone in on that last bullet, there are key differences that have emerged within the partnership's work. The things I would highlight that really we think are driving the survival gap are the differences in referral behavior, readiness to act for primary care to some extent, differences in pathway configuration and that interface between primary and secondary care. Access to diagnostics, particularly timeliness. We know the intervals for Wales are particularly long when compared to other countries, and the capacity considerations that go alongside. And then definitely the stream all the way through of awareness of different risk factors, signs and symptoms, and barriers to presentation. So those are the things I would kind of leave you with food for thought going into the next session. And I'll stop there, Tom.
So the next session I'm chairing will be called How Do We Tackle These Issues that we've just heard about. We'll be joined by Alexis Webb from CI UK, James Baker from Moondance Cancer Initiative, Richard Irwin from Roche, and also Julie Hepburn, who is the lead lay research partner with WCRC. And just before we start, I've been permitted to signpost you to our liquid biopsy company called CanSense on page 6. We're bringing to market a highly cost-effective blood test for detecting bowel adenomas, 82% sensitivity, stage 1 and 2 colorectal cancer with 79% sensitivity, and an early stage multi-cancer detection panel with up to 93% sensitivity, but hopefully we can expand on a bit more in the breakout rooms. But for now, I'll hand you over to Alexis as our first speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dean. Hopefully my slides will be coming up shortly. So I'm going to be talking today very quickly about Cancer Research UK's early detection and diagnosis roadmap. This roadmap was published in October of last year, and it Oh, this is probably, I should highlight this. This was Sam's final slide. I'm sure she wanted to give a shout out about their inequalities in early diagnosis of cancer virtual series event that's happening on Thursday. And please send Sam a message if you're interested in attending. Can I have the next slide, please? So yes, as I mentioned, our roadmap was published last year. Can I have the next slide, please? And the reason that we kind of started this effort to develop a roadmap is very varied and multifaceted challenges that we've already heard a little bit about from our earlier speakers. So the early detection field really does have challenges that range from, you know, scientific challenges all the way to engagement with industry and challenges within the delivery in the health system. So how can we tackle those challenges? So next slide, please. So we at CR UK undertook a plan to bring together over 100 expert stakeholders to consult around what we need to do as a community to make earlier detection and diagnosis of cancer a clinical reality in the future, and really create that shared vision where this is happening routinely. So the consultation highlighted the current challenges impeding progress, and we're, I think, as a community aware of some of those, but it also builds on those challenges to provide tangible recommendations that can take place across the entire ecosystem, from research and clinical translation all the way to health system implementation and health economics and policy. Next slide, please. So this was not just, you know, an effort across CR UK. We really consulted widely. We created a steering committee for this project that was chaired by Chris Whitty, and they consulted and really shaped the direction of the roadmap early on. We held workshops in 2019 with over 80 representatives from across sectors to help us really refine and hone the messages in the roadmap. And we also consulted with patients and the public. This was really an important aspect of the roadmap because obviously early detection and diagnosis is really a patient-facing challenge, and we needed to have their insights and impact to really shape what and make sure that the roadmap is relevant to them. Next slide, please. So the major themes that arose from the roadmap in terms of areas for research are the four listed here. So risk and prognosis, data science and systems, then incentivizing and supporting development and commercialization, so that really that translational piece, that second translational gap in order to get things closer and moving towards the clinic. And then thinking finally about the healthcare system itself and how we can improve innovation with it and lead to earlier adoption of early detection and diagnosis tests and technologies. Next slide, please. So the roadmap also made a set of policy recommendations that we are very strongly encouraging not only the UK government, but all of the devolved nations to consider. And I'm not going to dwell too long on this because I think James from Moondance is coming up with their Wales specific roadmap, and he'll go into several of these in more detail. Next slide, please. So finally, I just want to say that, you know, this has been done very strongly in partnership with not only research funding councils and the health service, but other bodies that are interested in diagnostics and making sure that diagnostics do move forward to patients, and bodies like NICE that think about the guidelines, And obviously the Academy of Medical Sciences was involved very early on in a kind of pre-event that I think really pushed us on this track to developing a roadmap. Next slide.
Can I get you to stop there? That's
Yep.
great. Thank you. Brilliant. Well done. Thanks, Alexis.
No problem.
Great. Now I'll hand you over to James now, if we could get his slides up. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Good morning, everybody. I'm James Baker, Research Associate at Moondance Cancer Initiative, and I'm here to talk to you about our roadmap for the future of cancer ED&D in Wales. Next slide, please. Moondance Cancer Initiative are a philanthropically funded non-profit looking to improve cancer outcomes in Wales. We have three main work streams. We demonstrate solutions, such as in our bowel cancer programme, accelerating training of endoscopists, enabling clinical research activity, training non-medical pathologists, and a project to improve the uptake of bowel cancer screening. We support innovators in cancer care across Wales, such as in our recent Innovation Time Awards, where we've awarded over £400,000 to 9 innovative projects for cancer care in the Hywel Dda and Betsy Cadwallader Health Boards. And finally, we generate insights, such as in the project that I'm here to talk to you today about, a roadmap for ED&D in Wales. This is actually partially inspired by the Cancer Research UK roadmap for early detection and diagnosis. We wanted to take that strategic direction and turn it into a series of time-bound aspirations for how Wales might move towards this vision, informed by systematic review of the clinical evidence and in consultation with clinicians across Wales and from other similar bodies. Next slide, please. A vision emerged through our research process for cancer ED&D in Wales, made of 4 main areas. Firstly, proactive care, shifting from this model of gatekeeping symptomatic patients to avoid overloading secondary care to one of case finding, identifying early asymptomatic and early symptomatic patients who we can treat to find better outcomes and with less resource intensity for healthcare. A relentless shared focus on early detection, primarily through our screening programs, which, as has been said already, are one of our most powerful tools in identifying disease early. A rapid diagnostic philosophy. We're lucky enough to be joined today by Sir Mike Richards, who will hopefully be talking a lot about this. This philosophy of separating out elective and acute care in centres accessible to the community, for instance, via GP referral in the case of rapid diagnostic centres, or maybe via other modes of referral in community diagnostic hubs. And finally, a tech-enabled combined diagnostic workforce, underpinning and enabling our diagnostic workforce with a efficient digital infrastructure and bolstering them with training programs to enable clinicians to become diagnosticians and sensible use of non-medical diagnostician roles. Next slide, please. In charting how we might want to get towards this vision in 10 years, we came up with 5 main themes. Firstly, quickly implement proven diagnostic technologies to triage access to secondary care in a safe, effective manner. Second, as I've already said, enable the diagnostic workforce with training and workforce schemes, and enabling them with digital infrastructure, using this to create capacity to cultivate that rapid diagnostic philosophy, rolling out rapid diagnostic centres across Wales and testing different models of community diagnostic hubs which may be suitable for the different localities in Wales, making early detection a strategic priority through the optimisation of our screening programmes, and in parallel, get ready for the coming innovations, most pertinently for cancer early detection and diagnosis. That's going to be liquid biopsies in the coming years. Next slide. So this is the roadmap that we're going to be publishing in a month's time. We do not have enough time today to go through the whole thing, but based on those 5 major themes, I just want to pick out a couple of examples which illustrate what we're talking about. Firstly, rolling out Cytosponge. Cytosponge is a diagnostic technology which is very low resource, low training requirements, and is proven to safely and effectively triage patients with suspected upper GI cancers, reducing endoscopy waiting lists. Enabling the diagnostic workforce, I want to pick up on digitising the pathology workflow. This obviously needs an effective digital architecture underpinning it, but it's associated with vast improvements in the efficiency of diagnostics across the world, and it's going to be vital if we're going to move on to the new paradigm of AI-assisted diagnostics into the future. The rapid diagnostic philosophy. Moondance Cancer Initiative are actually helping to support the rollout of rapid diagnostic centres across Wales with our support of a bowel cancer specific rapid diagnostic centre. Making early detection a strategic priority. This vision includes introducing and scaling lung health checks as a vital component, and optimizing our bowel screening to be of the standards that are seen internationally. Finally, getting ready for coming innovations. A primary idea which came out of our various roundtables with Welsh clinicians was of a landing committee for liquid biopsies, representing all Welsh health boards and linked organisations, in order to plan how, when the clinical evidence, for instance from GAIL, pans out for how liquid biopsies might be used in cancer detection, who will be responsible, what will happen, when the plans might be rolled out in Wales. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry, this has been a bit of a whirlwind tour. If you'd like to hear anything more, if you have any ideas or anything you'd like to discuss, please don't hesitate to reach out, James at moondancecancer.wales, or our website, moondancecancer.wales. Thank you very much.
That's excellent. Many thanks, James, and for keeping to time. I'll hand you rapidly over now to Richard Irwin from Roche, if we can bring up Richard's slides. Thank you.
James, you won't bring up any slides because there are none, as this is going to be an impassioned plea that only with collaboration are we going to beat this. So just before I go into that, conflicts of interest, as you know, from therapeutics, diagnostics, data, genomics, digital pathology, and I'm sure there's some that I'm missing. But to be really blunt with you, beating this is not about any of those things. For me, the focus on early screening and how we can use proven AI technology to make a real difference. These are the right areas of focus. Before I get into that, as a proud Welshman, we've all seen the data. Our outcomes must improve and can improve with the right plan. But as I've mentioned, this is about we've got the right focus and ambitions and even vision. We can create a roadmap and gap plan, but this, to be blunt, is about execution with conviction, with speed, with urgency. And my hope and plea is, no matter what the areas that we identify, we in Wales have traditionally moved pretty slowly on some things, and this is not a time for moving slowly. So what we've seen in our briefing notes is areas that are already proven to improve outcomes in a cost-effective manner. And if I just use one example that we're going to talk about later today, which is lung health checks, we've seen from Nelson and rollout throughout the UK the proven benefits of this. And this is something that I believe that we should be working together as a key deliverable from this meeting about how we do pilot that in Wales with, as I've said, that speed and that focus. One comment on piloting: we can't pilot with the aim of seeing the improved outcomes because it will take too long. So we've got to work out what are the parameters of success of our pilots, have realistic parameters, but know where is the point that we can go and then scale to cover every Welsh patient, not just in those pilot areas. So I just simply use this as an example, already proven, but also we see in our briefing notes that there is AI technology. One of them that I must be open that we work closely with is Behold AI, but the red dot capability is something that potentially could be used with those lung health checks to overall get the outcomes that Welsh patients deserve. I do also want to make a comment regarding improving pathway effectiveness, because of course, you know, we know that the vast majority of patients, fortunately, who go through screening are proven to not have cancers. But I think also we should look at areas of technology, and I use one example, which is breast pain clinics, where there is a greater amount of evidence now with simple questionnaires and family health checks. You can screen out somewhere between 70 and 80% of patients that you can say with 99.9% certainty do not have breast cancer, and therefore you can enhance the pathway for those that do and speed up that whole process. Other comments, there's no point speeding up the process unless we have the surgical capacity, the diagnostic capacity, the radiotherapy capacity to deliver on the promise of improved outcomes. And finally, to finish, please, a shared plan, an exemplary execution and a collaboration with governments, with NHS Wales, with the charitable sector, and I know some of you won't like this, with industry, because we believe we can bring expertise, yes, money as well, but together we can make a real difference on this rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that sterling call to arms. I think that really drives home the message of why we're all here today, and thank you very much. And lastly, I'd like to hand you over to Julie Hepburn, who's a very strong PPI representative in many fields in Wales. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Dean. I've been involved as a public member in research for the last 6 years following successful treatment for a stage 3 bowel cancer. And I'm going to talk today about why you should involve patients and the public in the research process and how to do this successfully. But just to clarify a couple of terms used first, when patients and the public are subjects taking part in research, this is participation. And when members of the public are helping as members of the research team to develop and run the study, this is patient and public involvement, or PPI as it's known. And this is what I'm talking about today. So why should the patients and public be involved at all? Well, we're going to be the eventual beneficiaries of the research, so we definitely have a vested interest in it. And we come at the problem with a different perspective from researchers and developers, because we've had experience either as a cancer patient or a carer and see things from a patient point of view. And as research in these areas will ultimately need patients to participate in the research, having a lay person on board at the beginning can help identify in advance possible barriers there may be to recruiting patients. For example, one trial I was involved in wanted to use a quality of life questionnaire for trial participants in a disadvantaged area of Wales. And this questionnaire had questions on it which were almost identical to those used on the benefits application form for a personal independence payment. I pointed out some people might think that the Department of Work and Pensions was checking up on their answers, and it was decided in the end not to use that particular questionnaire. So when is the best time to involve the public in your research? It may be tempting to think that it's easier to sort out all the details of the research, get the funding, and then bring the public in. But that wouldn't be a good idea for several reasons. Firstly, having patients involved at the bid preparation stage can help you spot any practical design problems or problems you may have in recruiting study participants, and you can then address these in the planning stage and so avoid protocol revisions if problems arise later. And secondly, most funders now want to see evidence that patients have been involved from the beginning and have helped to plan the research, as well as planning the public involvement throughout the project. Most funders will have to send projects to be reviewed to funders before funding is granted. And one of the reviewers will be a lay person who will look for evidence of early public involvement and appropriate levels of this throughout the project. And I carry out these reviews for NIHR and Health and Care Research Wales, and it's obvious when PPI hasn't been well planned. We can also help with ethics applications and even attend ethics interviews with researchers to answer any questions on public involvement which the ethics committee might have. And in addition to planning public involvement input to a project, a public member can also help to steer you through compliance with the recently published UK standards for public involvement. And this will help you to ensure that you get good public involvement in your project. So what's the role of the lay member once funding and ethics approval have been granted and the project starts? Well, most of you will be aware of the standard activities we do, reviewing patient-facing documentation such as information sheets, consent forms, lay summaries, and making sure they're written in a language understandable for the public. But we can be useful in many other ways as the research proceeds. Many of us will have skills and experience from previous lives, which can be used to contribute to the research, and we want to use these where we can. In projects I've worked on, I've helped to develop questionnaires for use with participants and focus groups. workshops, looked at transcripts of patient interviews, spoken at conferences and webinars, and helped to write articles for dissemination to the public. So there's really a lot we can help with. Most PPI opportunities come up with the NHS and charities research, but we can work with industry just as well. And I'm currently involved as a co-applicant on the CanSense project mentioned by Dean earlier. Industry may not have the contacts to recruit PPI. They don't sort of work with them generally, but Health and Care Research Wales can help you advertise for public members through their support centre, which has a weekly bulletin of these opportunities going out to 400 members of the public involvement community. So my message today then is involve us at an early stage, treat us as equal members of a research team, listen to our advice, and then give us real tasks to do during the research. And that way you'll avoid PPI tokenism and both parties will benefit from the experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was fantastic and a real great overview of why this is all about patient involvement. Thank you. So in the interest of time, thank you very much to all of our speakers in that session. I'll hand straight over to Judy Rees, who's CEO of Tenovus, who is chairing the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean, and Bore da pawb. Morning, everybody. I'm chairing this session with the title, What Opportunities Are There with the Things We're Already Doing? And I'm delighted to introduce 4 speakers who will speak in this order. Dr. Heather Wilkes speaking about the RDCs, Dr. Sinan Eccles talking about the lung health check in Wales, Professor Kate Brain who'll be talking about public awareness of cancer, and finally, Jennifer Adams, who'll be talking about PillCam, and she's a representative of Medtronic. So without further ado, if I hand over first of all to Heather, so we won't get further behind time. I'll try and keep you all to time. Thank you.
And I'll try and talk as quickly as possible because, like the other speakers, I could probably talk all day. We're talking about the rapid diagnosis, but I want to emphasise this is about the person and their problems. They're not a body system, they're not a bad toe, and they're definitely not there to fit into the services that we already have. Next slide, please. Just a bit of update about the rapid diagnosis centres. These were initially developed as a vague symptom pathway. I'm a GP myself, and there's a gut instinct that there's something wrong, but patients don't come with labels, and studies have shown that up to 50% of people with a cancer will not have a red flag system and therefore not eligible for the USC pathways. Next slide, please. So the aim of the RDC was to reduce the time to diagnosis in these patients with non-specific symptoms, but where we felt there was something wrong and likely to be a cancer diagnosis. Running through everything is the patient experience, and to improve the patient experience by timely and prompt investigations and full communication across the pathway, and obviously improving primary and secondary care working, which has suffered over the last number of years, and the longer term aims, and as has been said by previous speakers, you're not able to show that in 1 or 2 years, but to improve cancer mortality and survival in the long term. Next slide, please. This is with the diagnosis centre that we've set up in Neath Talbot, Swansea Bay with Cancer Network funding. This is the case for change. This is 2 charts showing the people that come into my room as a GP, and the ones on the left, that's a diagrammatic show of the symptoms they come with, and at the RDC they were given a cancer diagnosis. The slide on the right shows the symptoms that patients arrived with that were reassured that there was no significant diagnosis. So I hope you can see this really is a needle in a haystack. We don't fit into neat boxes, and we shouldn't have to. We're individuals and we need to know what the individual needs. Next slide, please. We did an economic evaluation with the team at the Health Economics Unit in Swansea University, looking at these people that the GP did refer, but they were downgraded because of the red flags. And then we compared them with cancer diagnosis in the RDC. I think you can see that the time of 6 days to 84 days for a diagnosis is massive, but it was also more cost effective. The RDCs across Wales have an average cancer pickup rate of 10%, but another 35% have a serious non-malignant diagnosis. So we need to look at how these people are utilising our services, but how our service design at the moment is a barrier, and so the outcomes are much worse for the individual, but also much more costly for the NHS. Next slide, please. So what could we do with the RDC approach? People seek healthcare with a problem, usually more than one. They don't attend with the system. It's becoming ever more complex when they present to primary care, to A&E, when they eventually get to an outpatient, and it's ever changing, and people have significant comorbidities. They may be survivors of their first cancer, having had quite significant treatment, and so people never really did fit a textbook, but they definitely don't now. What we want is to get to the bottom of the problem as soon as possible with as few contacts as possible, and not bounce around to be told what it's not, and then you start again. Next slide, please. So what are the opportunities? What are we doing now? The Wales National Programme, we aim to develop a standardised optimal pathway for people with vague symptoms, but I would hope it's also a pathway for other investigations. Data is key, and we're working with agreed data sets from all health boards in Wales, and with the NDR that will be digital. It's there for research. This is a massive area of research for patients and their problems, and for GPs. Next slide, please. To date, I'll leave you read that for time, the RDCs in Wales, we are virtually in every health board in Wales, and we will be soon as we go into 2022. And next slide, please, and the last slide. And what's the opportunity? Cancer diagnostic hubs, and as James mentioned earlier, we're working with the Moondance Cancer Initiative and Cancer Network to look at how this can be in site-specific areas. We need to change the system, and we need to change it fast. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Heather. I'll pass straight over then to Dr. Sinan Eccles to talk about lung health check in Wales. Thank you, Sinan.
Hello. So you've all heard lung health checks mentioned a couple of times already, which is great. So I'm a respiratory physician in Royal Glamorgan Hospital, and I've been working with the Cancer Network to scope lung health checks for Wales over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. So I always start with this. If you want to make a difference to cancer, then lung cancer is really the place that you want to start, because it is head and shoulders above every other cancer type in terms of the number of deaths that it causes in Wales every year. And the thing that we can do about it is screening. So we've got evidence from several large randomized controlled trials now showing unequivocal evidence of reduction in lung cancer mortality with low dose CT screening. And the one that really pushed that over the line was the Nelson trial, which was published in 2020. The way that it does that is by flipping the stage of diagnosis. So the graph on the right, you can see in Wales, over 3/4 of our cases of lung cancer are diagnosed with stage 3 or 4 disease. And if you screen people, as they did in the trials and as they did in pilots in Manchester and Liverpool, then you get 3/4 of your cases with stage 1 or 2 disease when you can radically treat them. Next slide, please. So the way to deliver low dose CT screening at the moment is lung health checks. So the idea is you invite people aged 55 to 74 or around that area, that you can nudge it up or down depending on your capacity. You invite current and ex-smokers for a risk assessment using a questionnaire to work out their risk of lung cancer, and if they're above a certain threshold, then they have a low dose CT. And if you package that with other things, particularly smoking cessation, then it really improves the cost effectiveness of doing so. Oh, my slide has gone into the matrix there. I don't know if that's happened to everybody else. Next slide, please. So the description of what I'm doing is scoping, but it's moved a bit beyond that now. So I did scoping work over the last couple of years through the pandemic, which slowed it down a bit, but delivered a scoping report to the Cancer Network and the Cancer Implementation Group last year. And the things that we picked out are that the National Screening Committee is looking at this. So that's why I was pleased to see Professor Richards on the call. So he's really smoothed the path for how screening gets looked at and found a place for where lung health checks is going to fit in his report that he did on screening. So the National Screening Committee are looking at this, and we're expecting a recommendation next year. In the meantime, what we want to do is get going with an operational pilot, because this is a complex thing to deliver, and we need to work out how we are going to deliver it efficiently to overcome all the challenges with it. So we've secured a small amount of funding from partners in the charity sector, industry sector, and some of the discretionary funds from the Cancer Network to try and get that off the ground. We're sorting out the detailed business plan now and hoping that we can get that pilot going toward the end of next year. That is going to be modest in size because there is not an infinite amount of money to do it. We're hoping to scan maybe 500 to 1,000 people, whereas the English sites are scanning upwards of 7,000 per site. But I think we need to get started in some way, and my aim is to have that as a template which we can then scale up, hopefully rapidly, when we've got the recommendation from the National Screening Committee. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. So that's just a brief schematic of what we're aiming to do with the operational pilot. So finding people from GP records, doing their lung health check over the phone initially, and then inviting some for CT scans. And we're hoping if we recruit from around 5 practices, trying to get the uptake as good as we can. Some of the pilots are seeing uptake of up to 70%, which is very good compared to most of the sites. We're hoping we could scan around 1,000 people. Last slide, please. And that is all I have to say. That's my contact detail if anyone wants to discuss that further with me.
Thank you very much, Sinan. And without further ado, I'll just pass over to Professor Kate Brain, Professor of Health Psychology at Cardiff University. Kate.
Thank you, Judy. I'll just wait for my slides to load up. Thank you. So the question I'm asking is public awareness of cancer. What are we doing about it? Well, the short answer is that there are no routinely implemented public awareness interventions in Wales. And yet the population needs to be primed about the importance of recognising and acting quickly on suspected cancer symptoms or engaging in screening so as to enable earlier diagnosis and treatment, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. So in this short talk, I'm going to give one example of a Welsh-led behavioural intervention that has already demonstrated evidence of effectiveness in reducing the barriers to help seeking in a high-risk population. And I'm also going to highlight some opportunities for testing new innovations for their acceptability and uptake, really as part of an embedded culture of evaluation. Next slide, please. So this echoes what Tom was talking about in his initial outline. These are the headline findings from our rapid population study, suggesting that COVID has indeed shifted public attitudes towards cancer and help seeking. We found that almost half of people who took part, who had experienced a possible symptom during the pandemic, did not contact their GP at all for any cancer symptom. And 1 in 5 said that they were less likely to engage in screening. So we really need to be thinking now about what we can do more of or do differently to improve public awareness and behaviours that are really prerequisites to cancer prevention and early diagnosis. So I think this is the abacus slide. Yeah, so there's good evidence that mass media campaigns such as the Be Clear campaigns can effectively deliver messages and improve outcomes at a whole population level, but they may not reach certain populations. So this is a Welsh-led example of a tailored and targeted intervention that has already proven effectiveness, and it uses a peer-supported model to increase awareness in communities who are disproportionately affected by cancer. So we demonstrated evidence in a phase 3 trial that Julie Hepburn was involved in. We demonstrated intervention reach and effectiveness in improving awareness, outcomes and earlier presentation, and at low cost. So we know that these types of interventions, community-based awareness interventions, are effective, and we could be implementing this type of intervention at scale in Wales to encourage and normalise earlier help seeking. So I just want to briefly give some examples of our current studies that are evaluating new approaches. So, for example, community-based interventions to augment the RDC pathway in areas of deprivation. We're also testing enhanced smoking cessation support and decision support tools as part of the lung screening or the lung health checks that Sinan described, and looking at alternative strategies for colorectal screening, including use of AI and chromocolonoscopy, and looking at public acceptability of risk-adapted screening and new technologies. And some things that are on the horizon that we could be thinking about in Wales in terms of evaluation are new person-centred approaches to really trying to increase the flexibility of services. So looking, for example, at electronic health methods of engaging people in targeted lung health checks, looking at integrating genomic and lifestyle data for colorectal risk stratification, and of course looking at the acceptability of multi-cancer early detection testing as a complement to routine diagnostic pathways. So these new innovations are disruptive, but they must be evaluated for their acceptability and their effectiveness, and importantly, whether they can support equitable participation. I can have my last slide, please. So in summary, we should be implementing and scaling up what we know works in terms of innovations that are grounded in the needs of diverse populations, underpinned by behavioural science, targeted community-based interventions that can reduce the barriers to help seeking by making services more flexible and easier to access should be implemented, but they are intensive and they need sustained long-term effort. New approaches to restructuring services should be properly evaluated to ensure that they're acceptable and that they don't inadvertently widen healthcare inequalities. And finally, we need investment in initiatives that are nationally coordinated, that are sustained and that are underpinned by evaluation, so that we can make decisions made on not perfect evidence, but on the best available evidence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for your rapidly keeping to time there. That was wonderful. So without further ado, I will pass over to the final speaker in this particular session. That's Jennifer Adams from Medtronic. Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. If I could kindly ask for my slides. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Adams. I work for Medtronic and I am the PIL-CAM sales specialist for the south of the UK. Next slide, please. Small bowel capsule endoscopy this year marks its 20th anniversary, having been commercially launched back in 2001. The indications were for obscure and overt bleeding, patients suffering with iron deficiency anemia, and patients suffering with inflammatory bowel disease. Developments from the small bowel capsule proceeded to us being able to make available the first colon capsule back in 2006, and further developments in 2010 allowed us to make available version 2 of the colon capsule, and the technology within the capsule allowed us to move from initial fixed rate frame rate to adaptive frame rate technology, which essentially works in line with the camera, and the frame rate adapts based on how quickly the capsule is transitioning through the GI tract. Currently, across the whole of Wales, we have 7 small bowel established services, and these can act as a platform for the development for colon capsule endoscopy in the future. Meta-analysis of the clinical data has highlighted, quite importantly, that so far capsule endoscopy has not missed any cancers. The technology and the sensitivity remains very high in comparison with standard colonoscopy. It's comparable, if not superior, to CT colonoscopy, and that is based around a statistical indicator, NPV, which is quite an important indicator that's used in tools that are used for exclusion. Next slide, please. As a direct consequence of the pandemic, it was very early identified that patients on the 2-week wait with concerning symptoms were not necessarily potentially going to be seen or offered a standard colonoscopy in a timely manner. And as a secondary result of that, early detection and diagnosis of colon cancer remained a real concern. We know it's well documented that the costs associated with treating patients with colon cancer at a later stage is highly evident. And so there was some work going on pre-COVID up in the Scottish Highlands in the form of the HiCap trial, which looked at remote patient management. And as part of that, the Scottish Government funded, as part of their Modernising Patient Pathway programme, the rollout of the ScotCap project. And as a result of that, NHS England initiated a pilot across the UK back in November last year, with two main objectives. The first being that there would be the detection of cancer in a low or intermediate risk cohort of patients, using FIT as a stratification tool, and secondly, to exclude patients from that cancer pathway upon confirmation of a negative test, which would free up space to be able to treat early patients in the higher risk cohort. Back in November 2020, Medtronic were contracted to provide just shy of 10,000 colon capsules, and the pilot has been rolled out across 47 sites in England and aligned to 17 cancer alliances. All the way through the pilot, there's been structured inclusion criteria and clinical guidance. So the patients at present are 2-week wait patients with a FIT score of less than 10, but still symptomatic, or 2-week patients with a FIT score of between 10 and 100. We will be imminently expanding that patient cohort to the post-polypectomy surveillance cohort. And in terms of short and medium-term developments, we also have dedicated software in the form of remote reader, which allows the reading and reporting of capsule endoscopy, both small bowel and colon, to be read from multiple sites. And in terms of the opportunities in Wales, if you think about the demographics and the rural landscape, this could be potentially something worth looking into. We do currently have artificial intelligence in the form of a console for standard colonoscopy, and in the future we will be developing that to be included within the capsules. Next slide, please. I thought I would just finish with a couple of visuals on the right-hand side of my screen for anyone that hasn't seen the equipment. These are the 4 items that are required in order to conduct a capsule endoscopy. The patient wears a sensor belt. It's connected to the data recorder seen in the left-hand side. The patient then swallows the capsule, which is connected to the data recorder. And once the procedure is complete, which takes between 9 to 11 hours, the patient will bring back the equipment and the report is uploaded onto dedicated PillCam software. Next slide, please. And for anyone that might look at the quality and clarity of images in comparison to standard colonoscopy, I thought I would finish with some nice visuals. Of course, what's really important is looking at the patient selection and the compliance with the workup of the bowel preparation. But this is what you can expect to see in terms of the quality. Next slide, please. Thank you once again for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much to all of our presenters in that session for excellent presentations. I think it falls to me now to introduce the next chair of the next session, but I will anyway, and that is Dr. Meredith Evans, who is the director of Wales Cancer Research Centre. Tom, have I taken your job? Sorry.
Thanks, Judy. Good morning, everybody. Bore da bawb. So it's my great pleasure to be chairing this session, which is going to be asking how we tackle the early detection and diagnosis challenges and what Wales could be learning from others. So first, it is my great honour to introduce Professor Sir Mike Richards, an oncologist by background. who was the UK's first National Cancer Director and chaired a review last year of NHS England diagnostic services, which made some really innovative recommendations, which I'm sure we'll hear about today. Also, Mike Moran, MBE, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Rutherford Health PLC, who has a track record of developing early startup businesses in healthcare. And I'm not sure how you're going to do this as a double act, but over to you.
Thanks very much. My review was really undertaken, and it started pre-pandemic because there was a recognition that our diagnostic services were under huge strain, and that all sorts of commitments we'd made on cancer, heart disease, stroke, respiratory disease, musculoskeletal conditions, none of them would be met unless we had better diagnostics. Weights were going up, we were having to outsource more, we were reaching a tipping point. And then along came the pandemic and frankly made everything a whole lot worse. So the recommendations that I made, first of all, we need to increase capacity, and of course that is both equipment and workforce, and that's not easy. But secondly, that we need to do things differently, and that's where this idea of streaming into acute diagnostics, the diagnostics that are needed by the A&E department or by inpatients, from all the rest, which is elective diagnostics, and the elective diagnostics we thought about and said, does that need to be done on an acute hospital site? No, it's better done off an acute hospital site, even if it's only for parking reasons, but actually it's for patient convenience as well. Now, that was not the only recommendation in my report. There were lots of recommendations on innovation, leadership, digital connectivity, networks, etc. We did define 3 archetypes of community diagnostic centre, as they're now called. A standard one, a large one which can have everything else on top, and a hub and spoke model. The standard one has imaging, CT, MRI, ultrasound, plain X-ray, also things for physiological measurements, ECG, echo, spirometry, and phlebotomy. The large ones will have things like endoscopy in them as well. So we're well underway. We've got 40 or more that will be up and running this financial year. Been great engagement across the country, more than I could have hoped for. And the good news is we've also got some further funding from the Treasury, so that with the programme we'll be able to extend into the next 3 years. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Mike, who knows what it's like in practice.
So Mike, thank you very much. And everybody, I'm Mike Moran. I'm the founder and chief executive of Rutherford Health. We set out initially to build a network of cancer centres around the country. We wanted to bring in innovation as part of our cancer offering, and we delivered in our cancer centres imaging, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, radiotherapy and high energy proton beam therapy. We were the first to introduce proton beam therapy into the UK, and we have 4 centres now operational across the UK, networked together, which enables significant efficiencies. And those centres are in Newport, South Wales, which is the first to operate, Northumberland, Thames Valley and Liverpool. However, what we wanted to do is really contribute to the overall effort, and in particular research and innovation. I'm a great believer in innovation, and we should only innovate in our space. We should stick to the knitting. Our knitting is around cancer and early diagnosis, and that was important that we only innovate in areas where we can exploit internally within our business and externally in the marketplace. Partway through this journey, we recognised that early diagnosis was key. There's an under provision across the UK, and we wanted to offer real solutions. We've now opened the first community diagnostic centre in Taunton, and in that centre, as Mike has just outlined, imaging in terms of X-ray, CT, MRI, ultrasound and echo. We have significant space in there to expand, and we have a 5+5 year contract with the NHS, and there's certainly a desire to expand the offering in there. What's really unique about this, however, is the workforce model. So we recruit staff together, the NHS and ourselves. So it's with the Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. We co-recruit staff. We have a moral obligation not to recruit staff from within the trust area itself. But we do ensure that our staff work side by side. So for a patient, it's seamless. They walk in the centre, they see our staff working alongside NHS staff, and anybody can see they're an NHS patient or a private patient. And I think the key for me now is around workforce development. We want to make sure that we contribute to the next generation of radiographers or radiologists, and we've recently established an organisation called the Rutherford Academy. We've already got radiotherapists, bursaries for radiotherapists. We've started an apprenticeship scheme for nursing staff, so we're taking staff through nursing training and then providing them with opportunities for chemotherapy work or general SAT work, but also for radiographers. So we've just got the first grant available and we're contributing to that ourselves. So a joint NHS Rutherford grant for apprenticeship scheme for radiographers. So the other key thing I'd just like to highlight in this is the other area that we want to develop through the Rutherford Academy is going into secondary schools, and in the first year of secondary school education, offering bursaries for young people who have an interest in the life sciences. We recognise actually that people don't realise that either radiotherapy or radiography or dosimetry or sonography is a career path until it's much late. We want to try and get that into the mind quite early on. So there is a Rutherford bursary for secondary school staff, secondary school students, and we want to do that for the 5 years or 6 years or 7 years they're in education. So there's a continuum there, and then we will use our own staff as mentors for those students as well. So it's real. We won't see them coming through either our centres or through the colleges for several years, but it's a way to really generate enthusiasm in the life sciences. And I think I should leave that there.
Yeah, thanks very much to both of you, and we'll look forward to discussing that further later. So next I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Hyam. Sarah was Director of Cancer Intelligence, Early Diagnosis and Clinical Engagement at CIUK until 2020, and since then she's been Director of Cancer Intelligence at GRAIL Europe. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much. I hope you can all hear me.
Yeah.
I'm in a slightly busy office. I can hear myself as well. So I'll try and whiz through a very rapid outline of the Gallery test and trials in the UK, and talk to you obviously from my GRAIL position now. Just a reminder, of course, that as if we need reminding, that cancer screening offers one of the best possible chances of us being able to detect cancer early, but unfortunately we still only have screening programs, at least population screening programs in the UK for 3 different types of cancer: colorectal, breast and cervical. Obviously, we have high hopes for lung cancer screening. What GRAIL has developed is the potential for a blood test that can detect for more than 50 different types of cancer. And we are undertaking a major trial in the UK, across the UK, working with NHS England on Gallery as a screening test, but also on a smaller scale, including Wales, on the simplified study for Gallery as a symptomatic test for cancer as well. So the extensive clinical programme that has validated the test to date has been carried out for the most part in the US. and the CCGA study was the largest case control study, which has shown the specificity to be incredibly high, around 99.5%. So a very low false positive rate, which is of course what you need if you are looking for a population screening tool. You want to be ensured that there'll be a low rate of false positives and that as few people as possible will be put through a diagnostic workup when there is no cancer present. What we also found was that, of course, sensitivity does indeed increase with progressing stage. And this is probably not surprising when you think about the way that the test works, which is to look for methylation patterns and shifts in methylation patterns from the cell-free DNA, which is shed from tumour cells in the body. Now, the added benefit of this test, aside from being able to detect a wide range of different cancers, the sensitivity does indeed increase at all stages for 12 pre-specified cancers in the CCGA study that account for nearly 2/3 of all cancer deaths. So it seems to be more sensitive for the more aggressive tumour types, which obviously gives us great hope in terms of overdiagnosis and there being less chance of overdiagnosis in a screening test that has better sensitivity for the aggressive tumours and worse sensitivity or lower sensitivity for the more indolent types of tumour. Aside from that, the symptomatic study so far, the study that Wales has been involved in, the Wales Cancer Network, is looking at its role as a potential tool in primary care. The observational study of around 6,000 participants is nearly closing now. We should be up to full recruitment, we're hoping by the end of next week, fingers crossed. That has been applied actually after the point of referral for the observational study. Using 4 different 2-eat-wait pathways and the RDC pathway, and the results will be analysed subsequently. With any luck, that will then be expanded into an interventional study in 2022. So as to NHS Gallery, which is the large-scale screening trial, this was launched to the public in mid-September. Our aim is to recruit 140,000 individuals aged 50 to 77 in the first year. They will then undergo up to 3 annual screens with the Gallery test. This is a randomized controlled trial, so participants will be randomized 50-50 into intervention and control arms, and the initial interim preliminary results will be analysed in terms of reduction in stage 4 between the intervention arm and the control arm. And then obviously subsequently the impact of 3 annual screens will be assessed. So as I say, we're recruiting in England and actually across 8 Cancer Alliance regions. All 8 regions are now live as of last week. And we have roving mobile units which travel around to areas specifically of higher deprivation, and we are very, very careful and putting a lot of effort into ensuring that we have a population representative sample on this trial, recruiting across all deciles of IMD deprivation code and multiple ethnicities. So I'll leave it there just to say that so far recruitment appears to be going very well, fingers crossed. We are suffering a little bit from winter, from COVID, from people having to cancel last minute because of positive COVID tests, etc. But we hope to be through the hump of that, obviously, after the winter, and then on trajectory to recruit the 140,000 within the 12 months that we need to do the second round of screening. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Just amazing and really ambitious studies, which sound fantastic. Okay, so the next speaker is Dr. Sian Morgan, consultant clinical scientist who's head of laboratory at the All Wales Genetics Service. So thanks very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Sian.
Diolch, Mary. It's a real pleasure being invited here today to talk about the Welsh strategy to integrate liquid biopsy services within NHS Wales for all cancer patients. The team at the moment involves colleagues within the All Wales Medical Genomics Service. The slide seems to have disappeared. But in addition to that, we have also got a wide team, including Dr. Messina, Professor Adams, Professor Jones, Dr. Shaw, Professor Ottoman, Dr. Cox and Professor Davies. Next slide, please. And our vision is very much to improve patient outcomes through the use of liquid biopsy across the whole cancer pathway within the NHS in Wales. And we really want to look at disruptive approaches for cancer care in Wales using this technology. Next slide, please. I don't need to tell this audience today, but there's a large amount of policy and frameworks where it's well described the need to actually move into cancer diagnosis, to improve diagnosis, treatment, diagnose early, referral patients to clinical trials, and really to adopt the new technologies that we now have got at our disposal. Next slide, please. So why the Cardiff and Wales team? Well, we've worked really well and efficiently. The diagnostic and clinical hub have functioned effectively and efficiently as a UK leader in the CIOK SMP2 trial. Wales has devolved NHS and a significant opportunity to develop single cancer pathways more effectively, including, as we've heard this morning, rapid diagnostic centres. We already have a liquid biopsy service within NHS Wales, and we've been running a liquid biopsy service since 2017, commissioned by WISC, although we only have certain targets on that liquid biopsy service at this moment in time. As a service, we're a rapid adopter of the Illumina TrueSight 500 gene panel, and this service is called the Cymru Service for Genomic Oncology Diagnosis. That service went live this year, and we're co-working with that company now to run the daughter service, which is not the solid tumour service, but the liquid biopsy panel. And we're the only NHS service within the UK that's collaborating with a company to set up this service at this moment in time. Next slide, please. So why are we in this great position? Well, as you're all aware, Welsh Government published the written statement back in 2017 of the Genomics for Precision Medicine Strategy, and this is run through the Genomic Partnership Wales team. And during that time, we've been enabled to invest and get the infrastructure in place. And one of those investments was NovaSeq 6000. It's the largest sequencer on the market, and you really need that kind of investment and that kind of technology when you're running these really, really large gene panels. Next slide, please. So what have we done in 2021? We applied and we were accepted for the European Molecular Genetics Quality Network, which was a ring trial study for prostate cancer testing. Those results are out and the assay did extremely well in that particular trial. We're waiting for that to come into publication. And we've been really busy during the last few months working through the Wales Cancer Bank, collecting samples from lung patients with stage 3B and 4 lung cancer samples. And we will get this assay fully validated by the end of this year. Next slide, please. And if you click once again, so whilst at this moment in time we're concentrating on secondary care and around the cancer diagnosis part of the pathway, we will soon be moving towards the high cancer suspicion part of the pathway and trying to introduce this test during that part of the pathway. However, the team really wants to concentrate on trying to get the testing methodology up and running for that cancer suspicion at the 2-week referral part of the pathway, and that is where we would like the strategy to go through to get the technology or some technology working at that part of the pathway. Next slide, please. It's really important to say, obviously, liquid biopsy is effective at other points of the pathway, both in early relapse detection, at disease response to treatment, at disease progression, or for detecting new resistant mutations. So this technology can be used at all different types of the pathway. Next slide, please. And currently we're working with the Cardiff BCMC and we have a data scientist that's just about to go into employment, because we are already collecting a huge amount of sequencing data on our Welsh patients. And there is a real need for us now to start integrating the genomic information that we're gathering with other healthcare information. And we really need to move forward into data mining and data integration, and to allow us to get to the information that we need for our clinicians as quickly as possible, to try, for example, to get our patients as quickly as we can into the trials that they need to go into. So very much the aim is to inform treating physician with as much information as we can, and to monitor any feedback at that point. Next slide, please. So that is a really quick whistle-top tour of this particular team and what we're currently doing. Thank you for the opportunity today. Really happy to answer any questions now or any other part of this workshop. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Great. And I'm afraid we don't have time for questions, otherwise I'll be sacked as chair. So I better, Tom, I think you've got your echo on. I'd better move forward to the last speaker. So I'd like to introduce Manish Patel. He's CEO and co-founder of Jiva AI, a self-professed geek, I found out this morning on the internet. But he has a background in molecular genetics, bioinformatics, mathematical and computational modelling of cancer. So over to you, Manish. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. I'm CEO of Jiva. Thank you for having me on today. I'm going to try to save you a few minutes and whiz through my points and not actually do a presentation. So Jiva is a machine learning platform for data-driven health. We're a Cardiff-based company, recently invested in by the Welsh Development Bank and collaborating with Welsh institutions as of the last 6 months. Of course, the specialist area that I'll be talking about today is AI, specifically multimodal AI. So that's the idea that you can mathematically model or computationally model different parts of a complex system, such as disease, and then bring those different verticals together over time. So the analogy I like to use in terms of the AI service that we provide is that of Microsoft Office. You use Excel or Word to create your documents for whatever you need to use them for. In the same way, I would like Jiva to become the go-to tooling for creating AI technologies in healthcare. And we can do everything from diagnostics, and I'll be talking about a few of those use cases in a second, all the way through to automation. And on the automation side, I won't go through too much detail there, but we've just signed on a pharmaceutical to do clinical trial optimization. So all of that whole breadth of data science and mathematical modeling we can cover with our platform. Essentially, what we're trying to do is enable rapid prototyping of AI solutions. So on the point of the subject of this panel, which is what can Wales be learning from others, the real point I want to drive home, which is really close to my heart, is lowering the bar to access to AI. We want to see true democratization of AI technologies. We want to see rapid prototyping of AI technologies within healthcare in such a way that it becomes easy for clinicians, for healthcare workers, for anyone within the healthcare system to pick up a tool and say, hey, here's my data. Let's see what we could see what value we could make from it. So when we say things like AI and start talking about the technicals, especially in the world of data science, it feels like a very specialist and niche area. And I don't think there's anyone in this virtual room that can deny the power and potential of AI in healthcare. So how can it be that the wielding of this power is held in the hands of so few people, i.e. the specialists within AI and data science? So to truly launch AI in this healthcare ecosystem, we need to be able to offer the right tooling so that everyone can build, test, validate, and deploy AI solutions at the click of a button. That is really Jiva's vision. We see this as a shift change in the way healthcare is delivered. In the same way we saw a shift in healthcare when, well, actually this is still happening, when people moved from paper-based systems to electronic systems. So we see the similar shift happening within AI, where we're enabling the people that really know what they're doing, i.e. the clinicians, the experts, to actually use this tooling to create their own products. Now, I will say that Wales is actually doing an awful lot right. There is definitely a readiness for change in Welsh institutions that we're not actually seeing a lot of in their equivalents in NHS England and international markets, actually. So that is actually a really good thing to see. But the 2 points I really want to drive home in terms of what Wales can do, can learn from other systems, are these 2 points. So technological capability. There is a lot of focus in other healthcare systems and other academic institutions on creating capability. So that is the R&D component of creating your AI solutions in a particular disease vertical. That is a good thing to do. I think that is a very positive thing to do. Of course, you have to do that. And you have to go through clinical trials and so on. But there is a relatively little effort being put into scale and adoption. And I'll use NHS England, as much as I love it, as an example where you can create a great technology in cancer informatics, say, and you'll end up spending 5 years trying to scale that technology into the next 10, 20, 50 hospitals within NHS England. That scaling and that adoption cycle has to be made better in Wales, and that is the thing I think people should be focusing on in the near future, because we have the technological capability already. Now I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go through all of the use cases that I wanted to go through today, but GIVA is already doing this and demonstrating this in prostate cancer diagnostics, where prostate cancer is the second biggest cause of death in men globally. It costs to the NHS is around £100 million in terms of complications. There's false positives going down the biopsy route, and we're already putting this technology through to clinical trial, in part supported by the TriTech Institute, and we are very gratefully one of the winners of the Innovation Time Awards that James from Moondance spoke about earlier. We're also working in the liver disease diagnostic space, enabling early detection of liver disease and hepatocellular carcinoma in conjunction with Roche and GE. But I've now run out of time, so I'm going to stop there and happy to talk about other things and all things AI with you directly. I'm sure the organisers will share my contact details.
I've just had the opportunity to dip in and out as the day's gone on and just listen to different parts of the conference today, and just been so struck by the energy, even though this is a virtual event, the energy, the art of the possible, the opportunities. Just fantastic to hear examples that are operational on the ground in Wales, but also in our colleagues in the wider UK. And I was just struck really that, for me as the custodians, and I mean that in a non-patronising way, of cancer care, both directly and indirectly for the people of Wales, we really have got a unique moment in time for us. With the challenges of COVID and with the public health hat on, we know we've got harms that have been accruing in the background. We weren't where we would want to be going into COVID, but we know some of the behaviours that all of us have been exhibiting and feeling we needed to take over that period. We know we've got a real battle on our hands with the potential increase in incidence of cancer. So this is our leadership moment. And the event today, for me, hearing that art of the possible, hearing how we can exploit technology, hearing how we can really drive early detection and diagnosis as a family, this is the time that we really need to shift into another gear. So for me, as I said earlier, I do think we're the custodians of cancer outcomes for the people of Wales, and with the ingredients of amazing cancer teams across the NHS. I mean, people have done a tremendous job through COVID. Everyone's exhausted, I'm absolutely aware, but even more reason why we need to do things differently to maintain the well-being, but actually shunt us to a different space. With our really strong foundations of strong partnership working with our third sector, which we value very strongly, with the support of the Life Science Hub, who've just been fantastic over the last number of years as well, with the strong relationship with academia and the growing, which I'm thrilled at, the growing relationship we have with industry. All of these are key partners. We all have to work together to achieve that kind of transformation that the people of Wales need. And listening through today, that it just puts us to another stage of foundation to do that. So for me, Tom, you just mentioned this, we're 3.2 million. You mentioned how we compare to a size of regions in other parts of the UK, but actually 3 to 5 million is the ideal size to change a nation. So if any part of the UK can really transform at speed, it is us. And giving our strong foundations of collaboration, our open-mindedness to do things differently, now is the time that we really need to work together to do that. So before I take people through what happens next, I just want to say some really big thank yous, and I'm mindful that I may miss people off, so I'm really sorry if I miss people off. I'll have Tom, who is really the boss, who will be messaging me in the sideline saying, what about? But firstly, just to say a really big thanks to all of you. Even though we finished midway through the afternoon, it's been a really intense few hours. I'm sure it's felt like a whole day. So thank you for all your contributions. People have not only the message bars, people who've been able to contribute. I know it's been challenging around opening for questions after sessions, but nevertheless, I'll come on to an opportunity to continue the conversation after this. So big thanks to you. Big thanks to obviously to all of our speakers, to our facilitators, to our chairs. Even though it's virtual, it's still quite traumatic for people to have to speak. You're a hard crowd, I'm sure, but so thanks for the time that people have taken to prepare for today. Big thanks to Julie Hepburn, who spoke earlier, just reminding us of really what we're all here for and the importance of engaging with our public, with our patients and their carers. In our developments right at the start. So actually what we do is fit for purpose and actually really meets the needs of the people who are here to serve. And of course, a really big thanks to our organisers, Tom, Louise, Wales Cancer Network, and of course the Life Science Hub. Just a really big thanks. A huge amount of work has gone behind this just to make it swift. And obviously a big thanks to Alistair and the team as well. So, the beginning of I'm sure a suite of other activities for us to really start to move things forward. And following today, just to give you a little bit of an outline of what's going to happen next, because obviously this cannot be a one-off event. This, as I said, we have a duty now to really act on these kind of activities and mainstream them into how we implement outcomes in a way that will really meet the needs for our people. So Julie, thank you very much. I understand that Julie's been roped into, you should have said no, but reviewing the outcomes of the event today. And I know you're going to be working with the Wales Cancer Research Centre and the PPI panel. So really big thanks, Julie, for leading that through and engaging with the Patient Public Involvement panel for that. So thank you. Big thanks. Big thanks to, as I said, to the Life Science Hub and the Wales Cancer Network, who will also be with partners pulling this now into some tangible actions and a roadmap that we can all get behind. And we will circle the wagons with you when that's been pulled together. This can't be about one particular forum implementing this. We've got to bring this to life, and we need to make sure that it is going to be realisable. And then, as I mentioned, if you've got reflections after today, or I'm assuming that we're going to be sharing the slides where people, not everybody use slides, but if you go back and have conversations with your teams, your colleagues, and you want to continue to contribute, obviously you've still got the Teams message bar to go back to, but under the auspices of the wonderful Louise, and Louise's email address is louise.camerton@wales.nhs.uk. And I'm sure you'll have it on other documents. So please let Louise know if you've got any final comments. So look, I'm not going to drag it out, but just to say again, look, a huge thank you. There's lots of conversations in the systems that we've put in place now with third sector, with the NHS, with Life Sciences Hub and industry. I think the art now is to make sure that we've got one drum beat and that we're bringing this together in coherent, galvanising actions, because this is, as I said earlier, this is our leadership time for the people of Wales to really do what we can to fast track improvements. And if out of today we can become, if you like, a guiding coalition to really fast track setting up early detection and early diagnosis in order to transform outcomes, then I hope people feel able and know that you've got the support of all of us to do that. So really big thanks, and I probably need to hand back to Tom. I'm not sure if Alistair's going to give us the scores on the doors with a Mentimeter, so thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Tracy. Is Louise or Alistair, did you want to sort of come back. What I wanted to say is, you know, we are obviously with Julie and others, and you know, working with the Industry Forum, working with the Life Science Hub and the Wales Cancer Research Centre, and including the PPI sort of section of that. We will be distilling all the information we've received today, including the votes, but we're also planning to get people back together in January. I think it's the 18th. We've got it penciled in at the moment for another workshop, which is really going to then flesh out the how do we, you know, choose those priorities that have been selected and make a difference to the people of Wales.